The folder was already open on the desk when Vera Callahan walked into the boardroom. She noticed that first. Not the 12 faces arranged around the mahogany table, not the projection screen showing her quarterly numbers in large blue font, not even Raymond Ostroff sitting at the far end with his arms crossed and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead like he'd already made up his mind before anyone sat down. She noticed the folder because it was hers, her personnel file, and it was open to a page she had never been allowed to see. Nobody told her to sit down. There was one empty chair, positioned slightly away from the table, closer to the door than to the presentation screen. She sat in it anyway. Ostroff cleared his throat. "Let's get started." Vera was 26 years old. She had been with Callaway Brent Financial for 11 months. She had grown up in Decatur, Illinois, in a house where the heat went out twice one winter, and her mother cooked breakfast on a hot plate for 3 weeks because the gas bill had gotten away from them. She had put herself through the University of Illinois on a combination of Pell Grants, a part-time job at a campus print shop, and 2 years of community college credits she'd transferred in to cut costs. She had a degree in economics. She had a certification in financial risk analysis that she had studied for on night shifts while her roommate slept. She had, in the 11 months since joining Callaway Brent as a junior analyst, identified 3 separate errors in the firm's regional portfolio models, errors that, if corrected, would have saved the Midwest division an estimated $4.2 million in misallocated assets. She had submitted those findings in a formal memo. The memo had been acknowledged, nothing had been corrected, and now she was sitting in a chair that was not quite at the table. "We appreciate you coming in," said a woman named Patricia Holt, who was the director of human resources and who had a habit of beginning sentences with phrases that made things sound optional when they were not. "We've been reviewing some concerns." "What concerns?" Vera asked. Patricia looked at Ostroff. Ostroff looked at the folder. "There have been some questions," he said slowly, "about the sourcing of your analysis." The room was quiet enough that Vera could hear the ventilation system running overhead. She kept her hands in her lap and her face still. She had practiced this, not because she had anticipated this specific meeting, but because she had grown up in rooms where the only power she had was the ability to not let them see her react. "I'm not sure what that means," she said. Ostroff picked up a single sheet of paper from the folder and held it across the table without standing. Someone passed it down to her. It was a printed email, an email she had never written, from an address that looked like hers but wasn't quite, sent to a competitor's research department 8 months ago, containing portions of internal client data. She read it twice. She looked up. "I didn't send this. The email address is not mine. The domain is wrong. Mine ends in .com. This one ends in .co." She set the paper down on her knee. "That's a spoofed address. It would take someone about 4 minutes to create one." A man named Gerald Fitch, who was the head of compliance, and who had been with the firm for 22 years, leaned back in his chair and said, with the particular patience of someone who has never needed to hurry, because the room has always waited for him, "We've had our IT department review the matter. What did they find?" "They found the email." "Did they trace the originating server?" Fitch paused. "That's not. Because if they traced the originating server," Vera said, "they would find that it didn't come from my machine, my network, or any device I have ever logged into." She let that sit for a second. "Did they trace it?" No one answered. She had not slept well the night before. She had gone home after work, made a bowl of pasta she didn't finish, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, rereading her original memo for the 40-something time. She wasn't sure why. She had not known this meeting was coming. Patricia's email requesting her presence had arrived at 4:47 p.m. and said, "Only please come to conference room B at 9 a.m. tomorrow." No further details at this time, but something in the phrasing had told her to be ready. She'd learned to read those kinds of sentences the way her mother had learned to read the first cold days of October. Not for what they said, but for what they meant was coming. She had pulled out every piece of work she had submitted in the past 11 months. She had cross-referenced her memos against the publicly available datasets she had drawn from. She had printed 3 things and put them in a plain manila folder that was currently in her bag, under the chair that was not quite at the table. She reached down and picked it up. "I'd like to show you something," she said. Ostroff frowned. "Miss Callahan, I don't think it'll take 2 minutes." She said it the way she'd heard him say things, Flat, declarative, no room built in for the other person to object. She set the folder on her knee, opened it, and removed the first document. This is the memo I submitted in February. She held it up so the room could see it, then set it on that table and slid it toward the center. This is the public dataset I cited in footnote 3. She placed the second document next to the first. And this is the page from Callaway Brent's own 2023 annual disclosure that confirms the regional portfolio weighting I flagged as incorrect. She placed the third document beside the others. The error I identified in February is still in the model. I checked this morning. She folded her hands over the now empty folder. If someone in this room was concerned enough about my analysis to fabricate an email suggesting I leaked data to a competitor, I would like to understand why. Because the simplest explanation is that the analysis was correct, and correcting it would require someone to explain why it wasn't corrected in February. The ventilation system hummed. Patricia Holt was looking at her pen. Gerald Fitch was looking at the table. Ostroff was looking at Vera, with an expression she could not entirely read, not quite anger, not quite the comfortable dismissal he'd walked in wearing, something less settled than either of those things. Vera did not fill the silence. She had learned that too. She had first noticed the model error on a Tuesday in February, 6 weeks into the job, at 11:30 at night, sitting in the open plan office after most of the building had emptied out. She'd been working late not because anyone asked her to, but because she'd been given a set of regional performance reports to format into a presentation, and she'd gotten stuck. Not on the formatting, but on the numbers themselves. Something hadn't added up. The annualized return projections for the Midwest commercial real estate segment were tracking about 8% above what the underlying asset valuations should have supported, and the weighting formula in the base model was pulling from a 2019 benchmark that had been deprecated in the industry 2 years ago. She had stared at it for a long time. Then she had opened a new document and started writing. She knew, even as she wrote, that there was a version of this where she said nothing, where she formatted the presentation the way it had been formatted the year before and the year before that, and submitted it, and went home, and did not make herself a problem. She was 6 weeks into a job she had spent 2 years trying to get. She was the only person on her floor who had not gone to a school anyone in that building had heard of. She was young and she was new, and she was not from a family where anyone had ever worked in a place like this, and she knew, not as self-pity, just as fact, that the margin for error afforded to her was narrower than the margin afforded to others. She submitted the memo anyway. Not because she was naive. She submitted it because the alternative was to know something and say nothing. And she had not put herself through 6 years of studying and working and deferring things that other people her age took for granted in order to walk into a room and perform ignorance. The memo was acknowledged by Gerald Fitch's office 11 days later. A brief email. Thank you for flagging. Under review. Nothing after that. She had followed up once. In April, the reply had been even shorter. She had not followed up again, but she had kept copies of everything. Ostroff removed his reading glasses from the top of his head and put them on. He picked up the first document, her original memo, and read it with the slow deliberateness of a man who had not read it before. The room waited. He set it down. He picked up the annual disclosure page. He set that down too. Gerald, he said. Fitch did not look up immediately. When he did, something in his face had changed. A slight compression around the jaw, a careful stillness that Vera recognized as the expression of a man recalibrating. The IT report, Ostroff said. Did it include a server trace? A pause. I would need to check on the specifics. Please do. Fitch nodded once and wrote something on the notepad in front of him. The scratching of the pen was the only sound in the room. Patricia cleared her throat. Perhaps we should. This might benefit from a short recess before we continue. That's fine, Ostroff said. He was still looking at the documents in the center of the table. Ms. Callahan, would you mind waiting outside? Vera stood, picked up her bag and her empty folder, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. The model error is in column G of the regional weighting sheet, she said. Specifically, the compounding interval. It's set to quarterly when it should be monthly given the asset class. The fix takes about 20 minutes. She paused. I'm happy to walk someone through it. She stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind her. There was a row of chairs outside conference room B, the kind with padded seats and metal arms. the kind that exist in institutional spaces to communicate that waiting is expected and comfort is not guaranteed. Vera sat in one. She set her bag on the floor between her feet. She looked at the wall across from her, which was hung with framed photographs of the firm's founding partners, men in suits from the 1980s with the slightly blurred quality of photos that had been reprinted from older originals. She thought about her mother. Her mother worked in the billing department of a regional hospital in Decatur. She had worked there for 19 years. She was good at her job in the specific and undervalued way that many people are good at jobs that organizations could not function without, but prefer not to think about too carefully. She had a gift for catching errors, in invoices, in insurance codes, in the small bureaucratic gaps where money disappeared if no one was paying close enough attention. She had flagged those errors for 19 years. She had received in those 19 years 2 small cost of living raises and 1 written commendation that had been placed in her file and never mentioned again. She was not bitter about it. Vera had asked her once, when Vera was about 17 and had the particular impatience of someone just beginning to understand how things worked, why she kept doing it, kept flagging things, kept caring, when it was clear that no one above her was paying the same kind of attention. Her mother had looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because the error is still there whether I say something or not," she said. "I'd rather have said something." Vera sat with that in the hallway outside conference room B and looked at the photographs of men from the 1980s and waited. The door opened 23 minutes later. It was Patricia who came out first, and then Fitch, and then 2 other people Vera didn't recognize who had not spoken during the meeting, and who now walked past her down the hallway without making eye contact. Ostroff came out last. He stopped in front of her. She stood up. He was a tall man, somewhere in his late 50s, silver-haired in the way that photographs well in annual reports, with the particular authority of someone who had been the smartest person in most rooms for long enough that he'd stopped checking. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she still couldn't fully classify. Not warm, not apologetic, but something more honest than she'd expected. "The IT department is going to run a full server trace," he said. "We'll have results by end of week." "Okay. In the meantime, you're not being asked to take any leave." He said it as though the alternative had been genuinely considered. "You'll continue in your role." She nodded. He looked at her for another moment. "The column G issue," he said. "Who else have you talked to about it?" "No one? I put it in the memo?" "Right." He nodded slowly, as though he was doing a particular kind of arithmetic in his head. "I'd like you to come to a meeting Thursday afternoon. I'll have Patricia send you the details." He paused. "It'll be with the modeling team." "I'll be there," she said. He turned to go. Then he stopped, half-turned, not quite looking back at her. "Where did you do your undergrad?" "University of Illinois," she said. He nodded again, the arithmetic still running. Then he walked down the hallway toward the elevators, and she watched him go. She did not celebrate. That wasn't how it felt. She went back to her desk on the 4th floor, sat down, opened her laptop, and stared at the spreadsheet she'd been working on the afternoon before, the one she'd left open when Patricia's email came in at 4:47. The columns were where she'd left them. The cursor was blinking in cell G14 like a small, persistent question. She thought about what she'd expected when she submitted the February memo. Not recognition. She hadn't been naive enough to expect that. She had expected, maybe, for the error to be quietly corrected and for no one to mention it, which would have been frustrating but survivable. She had not expected the fabricated email, the open personnel file, the chair positioned slightly away from the table. But she also had not expected Ostroff to read the documents, to ask about the server trace in front of Fitch, to stop in the hallway and ask which school she'd gone to in a tone that was not dismissive. She wasn't sure what any of it meant yet. She knew better than to be sure. What she knew was that she had 3 documents in a plain manila folder that were sitting on the conference room table right now, and she had copies of all 3 at home, and she had a draft of the corrected model saved to a drive that was not connected to any Callaway-Brent network, and she had her mother's voice in her head from 9 years ago, saying the error is still there, whether I say something or not. She pulled up a new document. She started typing. She was documenting everything. Not because she was angry, not even because she was afraid, but because attention is its own form of power, and she had been paying it longer than anyone in that boardroom had bothered to notice. The server trace came back Thursday morning. 2 hours before the modeling meeting. The spoofed email had originated from an IP address registered to a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. The timestamp placed it on a Saturday afternoon. Vera had not been in the city that Saturday. She had driven to Decatur for her mother's birthday and had the toll road receipts to prove it. She was informed of this by Patricia Holt via a brief email at 8:47 a.m. in language so carefully neutral it could have been written about a weather pattern. We wanted to update you on the findings. The matter is under further review. We appreciate your patience. Vera read it twice. She forwarded it to her personal email. Then she got up, poured herself a cup of coffee from the 4th-floor break room, and walked to the window that looked out over the parking garage. She thought about what she knew and what she didn't. She knew the email was fabricated. She knew the error in the model was real. She knew that someone in the building had decided, at some point in the past 8 months, that the most efficient solution to the problem of a junior analyst who had spotted something uncomfortable was not to fix the thing she'd spotted but to discredit the person who'd spotted it. She knew that plan had not worked. What she didn't know was who. What she didn't know was whether the Thursday meeting would be a genuine reckoning or a careful repositioning designed to minimize damage. What she didn't know was whether, a year from now or 3 years from now, any of this would matter in the way she wanted it to matter. She stood at the window with her coffee and let herself not know those things for a little while. Then she walked back to her desk and started preparing for the meeting. Conference room A was larger than B, a longer table, more chairs, a projector screen that actually worked reliably. When Vera walked in at 2 o'clock Thursday afternoon, there were 7 people already seated. She recognized Ostroff at the head of the table. She recognized 2 members of the modeling team she'd interacted with briefly in her first weeks. She did not recognize the other 4. One of them, a woman in her late 40s with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked up when Vera came in and said, "You must be Vera Callahan. I'm Sandra Voss. I'm the firm's external audit liaison. We spoke briefly in February, I think, when you were onboarded." "I remember," Vera said. She did remember vaguely. A 5-minute introduction in a hallway, the kind of meeting that gets forgotten in the noise of a first week. She had not known Sandra Voss's title at the time. She had not known to remember it. "Sit anywhere," Sandra said, gesturing at the remaining chairs. Vera sat at the table, not away from it. Ostroff opened the meeting with the particular efficiency of someone who had decided how he wanted things to go and was moving toward that destination with minimal detours. The column G error was real. The correction was straightforward. The question of why it had not been corrected in February was, he said, something the firm would be addressing internally. He did not say addressing with whom. Sandra Voss asked Vera to walk through the original analysis. Vera did. She went slowly, not because anyone seemed confused, but because she had learned that going slowly in a room where you were young and had gone to a school no one recognized was a way of not letting people decide they had heard enough before they actually had. She laid out the benchmark issue, the compounding interval, the projected impact on the quarterly figures going back 6 quarters. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "That's 4.2 million in reallocation," Sandra said. "Roughly, depending on the quarter." Sandra wrote something on her notepad. She looked at Ostroff. Ostroff looked at the table. "We'll need to file an amended disclosure," Sandra said, "given the time frame." Ostroff nodded. One of the men Vera didn't recognize leaned forward and said, in the pleasant, exploratory tone of someone testing the weight of a thing before picking it up, "Mrs. Callahan, what prompted you to dig into the benchmark in the first place?" Most junior analysts would have formatted the report and moved on. She looked at him. "I noticed the number didn't match, so I looked at where it came from." He nodded slowly. "Just instinct?" "Habit," she said. "I grew up watching my mother catch errors in billing systems for 20 years. It's how I learned to read numbers." The man with the pleasant tone wrote something down. She wasn't sure what. It didn't matter. What mattered was the amended disclosure which would be filed. What mattered was the corrected model which would be updated. What mattered was that she had submitted a memo in February with her name on it, and whatever happened next, that memo existed, dated and documented, and the error it described was being corrected now. She stayed late that night, not because there was work left unfinished, but because the office was quiet, and the quiet felt like something she had earned. She sat at her desk on the 4th floor with the lights dimmed and the city visible through the window in the dark geometry of buildings and lit offices and car headlights, moving on streets 11 floors below. She thought about February. She thought about the Tuesday night she'd sat in this same building, in this same kind of quiet, with a formatting job and a number that didn't add up. She thought about the 11 months between that night and this one. The memo and the silence and the fabricated email and the chair that was not quite at the table and the 3 documents in a plain manila folder and Ostroff stopping in the hallway and asking where she'd gone to school. She thought about what her mother would say. Her mother would probably say something practical. She would ask whether Vera had eaten dinner. She would say good in the particular way she said it when good meant I knew you would. She would not make a speech about it. That wasn't how she operated. Vera pulled out her phone and typed a message. The meeting went well. Calling you this weekend. Tell you everything then. She put the phone face down on the desk and looked at the window for a while. She was 26 years old. She had a degree from a school that no one in that building had photographed for their wall. She had a certification she'd studied for on night shifts. She had a mother who had spent 19 years pointing at errors in a system that preferred not to look at them. And she had inherited from that mother the specific stubborn habit of looking anyway. The error had been corrected. The disclosure would be filed. Her name was on the original memo, dated February, documented and copied and real. It was not everything, she knew that. There was still the question of who had sent the spoofed email, still the question of what internal review actually meant, still the long, ordinary question of what 11 months became in a year or 3 years or 10. But the number had not added up, and she had not pretended otherwise. And sometimes, not always, not as often as it should, but sometimes, that is exactly enough to change what happens next. Her phone lit up with a reply. Her mother had sent back 3 words. That's my girl. Vera smiled at it. Then she closed her laptop, picked up her bag, and took the elevator down to the street. Some things only change because someone refuses to look away from what doesn't add up. That refusal doesn't come from a prestigious degree, or a title, or a chair at the right part of the table. It comes from being raised to understand that the error is still there whether you say something or not, and deciding every single time that you'd rather have said something.